Morning. How are you? Happy Valentine's Day. I didn't even think about it.
Yes.
Jean is red. Yeah, okay.
You didn't even think about it?
Well, I mean, I thought about Valentine's Day. I didn't think about wearing red. Yes.
No, you blew
The color for
it.
this
The
thing?
blue looks good on your eyes.
Thank you. That's the look I was going for, Jean.
Well, blue is my favorite color, so you're always good.
Oh, good. Yeah, thanks. Morning. Morning, guys. Morning, Kings. Was anybody doing anything for Valentine's Day?
Terry's birthday is tomorrow, so we don't.
Carrie's what?
Terry's birthday is tomorrow, so we never really do much for Valentine's.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
My dad's birthday was yesterday.
Oh, that's right.
She must have stepped on this.
You would have been there.
I don't do well that.
Yeah.
Last year was about a week after his birthday.
What about you
and I thought
guys?
of
Do you
his
do
mom.
much?
We're gonna go out to dinner.
Well, at least you're there for the beginning.
What's that?
At least you're there in the beginning.
That's why they invited
Something
me.
little.
Then, that's why you invited me. Because then I'd be sure I didn't miss Terry's birthday.
Well, plus Aaron's gonna be gone for a whole week skiing, so we thought we'd let them.
Oh, where's she going?
Grand Targhee out in Wyoming. Well, Idaho, Wyoming, right out there.
Who's all going?
There are 5 of them going.
Cool.
Yeah, that'll be
Let me
cool.
think. Aaron Peterson, Braden Bell, who's not yet a believer, but they're gonna work on him this trip. And then 2 other guys that,
We have to go to Lorraine.
they've been hanging out and skiing together. Nathaniel and Daniel are their names.
Okay.
They're, like, Daniel is probably in his 40s, and then the others are kids, yeah, a little bigger. Yeah, so she'll all, she's gonna have fun. He is a little jealous.
She is.
That sucks. He will have his chance.
So we'll be there probably a little late.
Good morning.
Our anniversary was yesterday.
Hey, happy anniversary.
It was 28.
28. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Finlays, how long have you been married? I should ask your wife. 35. Anybody got that beat?
Mine would have been,
Oh, you did?
mine would have been 56.
56. How long were you married?
About 64 years.
About 64.
Yeah.
Wow.
Don't make us out to be the old goats here.
35 feels like 50. I mean.
You guys are 35 years? Oh, I was gonna say, holy cow.
Gosh, I hope not. That's pretty
You
good.
married when you were 10 or what?
35 is the new 50.
Yeah. All right, final one of this. Next, I plan on moving on to talking about what is assurance of salvation. So we're going to switch topics completely. This topic is over. These Sunday school classes are run where we're trying to do 6 to 8 weeks on a topic or a study. And so last fall, we did, what was the name of that topic? What did we do? I don't remember.
Is that the critical theory?
Critical theory stuff. That's right. And then this on living as a Christian citizen. So 2 kind of political topics. And I wanted to, one of the things you deal with a lot as a pastor is people questioning salvation or their assurance salvation. So I want to talk about what that is and what that isn't for a few weeks. We don't intend, although feel free if you'd like to, for you to have to stick with one teacher in one class the whole entire time. So I believe Pastor Jeff, whatever he's been teaching, he only has a lesson or 2 left. So if you wanted to switch and check out his class, feel free. Jonathan Brood is in Joshua, if that was of interest to you. After Jonathan wraps up his class, Dave Franks is going to be teaching on parables. So that could be an option for you too. So, don't feel obligated to stick with me. But if you want to too, if the doctrine of assurance is of interest to you, feel free. All right, welcome to those 2 souls joining live by live stream. I figured more of you would be checking out live stream this morning with it negative 35 or whatever it was today.
That's where we live.
I'm really proud of you guys. Way to go.
-19.
Really? Only negative
I
19.
kind of get used to it.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the wind chill.
We were sledding yesterday. It was fine.
That was cold.
It was a little cold. Yeah, I don't know. We made it 45 minutes or so. All right, let's pray and away we'll go. Father, we do continue to ask for your mercy, and yet we also ask you how long, oh Lord, how long will we have to be ruled by people who are so radically and pervasively immoral and unjust, who don't care for those that they govern, who continue to take freedom, who use their positions to make money and lord it over others, God. And so how long? God, would you give us as your people wisdom to live in this day in a way that glorifies you, in a way that does protect and love our neighbors and our families, God. Please give us wisdom for this, courage. Help us know what to do and what not to do. And so, God, we look to you for this. In Jesus' name, amen. Morning, Brad. Thought you guys were skiing. You're back? Weren't you in skiing or something?
Yeah.
You already made it back.
Blood request.
Yeah. All right. So a bit of review. One of the main things we're looking at is human government is from God, Romans 13. And yet one of the things that we don't often consider is that those who govern do so by consent. I shouldn't say we don't consider that. I think we kind of take that for granted here in our kind of government, that those who govern do so by our consent. And yet I think there is a growing understanding that they don't do so by our consent anymore. They don't govern as representatives as they should. But in our form of government, we do have, if you remember back to Greek philosophers and the 3 forms of government, Aristotle, monarchy, where which we also have. So how many of you have been reading this? I should ask that. Is that okay? So a decent amount. So John Locke, as we'll get into in a moment. I had the wrong one here. John Locke took the 3 forms of government from Aristotle and wrote about them widely. And his writings were greatly influential in the formation of our government. And so the 3 kinds of government that could be possible ended up with our 3 branches of government as a way to use the best of all of them. And early on, the Europeans, really thinking that America was kind of a backwater hickish, were totally impressed with our kind of government and sought to establish those kind of governments all around Europe. But at the beginning of it all is that all of this is from God. All of the rights that citizens have aren't from government, but from God. And so government needed to be limited. And these inalienable rights, these natural rights, came from God and not from government. And so if the government ever infringed on those rights, the people have the right, and in some cases, the duty to resist and to rebel. And so that's what we've learned in some from all those last 5 weeks till now. And so if we remove this understanding that these rights aren't from government but from God, then you remove the right and duty to resist. Okay? So that's the most important part of that. And then the second thing is the reason that our kind of government was formed is because of the doctrine of sin. That's it. We do not entrust that kind of authority to human beings because of the doctrine of sin. And so checks and balances with ultimate governing power residing in the people, in the governed and not in the governors. So let's just talk a bit about freedom. What is freedom? Somebody define that for us. What's freedom?
Living in society with the least amount of laws required.
Okay.
Society function. You gotta have some laws, you gotta have some boundaries, but having the liberty, the ability to do what you want with the least amount of coercion.
Yeah, there you go. So it has to do with not being coerced, having the freedom and ability to do as you will within moral boundaries. All right, good. So what are the absolute prerequisites in order for a people to have and maintain freedom? What is necessary in a nation for that freedom to be, well, to have it?
Laws.
Okay, you do need laws. You need order.
Christ.
Guns.
Guns. Yeah, you do.
And Christ.
Yeah. You need a transcendent, he is, even if we don't believe it, but a belief in a transcendent God who rules over all things. Absolutely. What else? Anything else necessary? Well, we're going to look at a few other things that are necessary for it. Some of them, I think you'll go, yeah, duh. But it's not things that we often think about as necessary to this kind of freedom that we're looking at. All right, so a bit about John Locke. He wasn't our kind of Christian, but his understanding of government is based on what we would understand as Christian, and so is very helpful. Again, he stands on a long line that we've traced all the way back to before Christian times, that the rights of human beings are based on a transcendent God who creates and governs the universe. So again, that's not new. But just to make sure that we continue to hear this, the right to life is because life is given by God. And so government doesn't have the right to decide who lives and who dies, except on basis of justice. They're given the sword to punish the evildoer, who might forfeit his right to live if and when he takes the life of another in other limited cases. But you and I have a right to live because God has decided to give you life. And no one other than God, yourself included, has a right to take it. So government does not bestow on us the right to be. This is why abortion is so abhorrent. This right to life, though somewhat lesser, also extends to property. Why does it extend to property? Where in the Bible would we understand that the right to own property isn't given by a government, but by God?
Joshua, Moses. Garden of Eden.
Yeah, Garden of Eden, sure. Yeah, all the way back. And then just all of the laws regulating property are based on the idea that you own it. It's yours and it can't be taken. But John Locke then would say that this understanding of the right to property given by God, that is what actually necessitates government. That the only reason government is necessary is because of the right to private property. So tweak that out. Why would that be? Why would this right, God-given right to property, necessitate government?
To have people, where you have to have laws in place.
Yeah.
And enforce them.
To enforce them.
Property owners in check.
Yeah, because you might have a neighbor who is bigger and stronger and more populated than you, and he might decide that he wants your property. And it would be just chaos if everybody was always having to deal with their own issues. And so you need a a government that protects property. And then also you'll have other governments, other nations who think that they really like your nation and the land that you have and might want to take it. And it's helpful to have a centralized government to protect those interests. All right, so this is important. Government then exists to protect the rights of the people to their property and their liberty, not to infringe on your rights to property and to liberty. So then it comes simply from that, since these rights come from God, if even the government violates our inalienable rights, the rights to life and property, then the people have a right and sometimes a duty to resist. So this is what Locke was saying. Again, I don't think there's anything new, but our government was based largely on John Locke, who based his understanding of government on everything that you've seen that came before that. All right, one of the things that we didn't talk about when we talked about what do you need in order to maintain liberty, one of those things that Locke talked about and that our government, our founders talked about constantly is the need for virtuous people. There is a requirement in order to have and maintain liberty to have virtue. So we've already talked about liberty, but what I want to ask you, so we understand what liberty is, what is our cultural definition of liberty currently? And how does it differ from what actually liberty is? What does our culture demand that liberty be?
The right to live in this country.
No, I don't think
The
so.
right to do whatever you want.
Yeah, the right to do whatever you want. All right, so there was a quote in, I think it was in here, by C.S. Lewis saying that, well, under 2A there, moral relativism, which is what Dennis was getting at, that liberty needs to, in order to have liberty, you and I need to conform our thinking to what actually is true. What actually God has created, what reality is. So, Dennis is male.
Today.
Yeah, well, yeah. That's what we demand liberty is, but God created a reality and we have to conform our thinking to that reality. But what our culture demands is that we conform reality to what I think. All right. How might that threaten liberty? How would that understanding, that moral relativistic thinking, threaten actual liberty, freedom to act without coercion?
Your rights are subject to my whims.
Okay. Give me an example.
Well, why should you be allowed to have a church that teaches that men are men and women are women? If I want to say that tomorrow I'm going to be a
Absolutely.
girl and maybe something
Okay.
else, but I
Yes.
don't even know what it is.
Yes. So when we reduce what is true and real to what you think, and I violate what you think, my liberty is going to be restricted by your actual stupidity.
Yeah, insanity.
Insanity.
Group insanity.
Group insanity. Right. So erosions of, yeah, go ahead.
It's already come back to bite because the Title IX, when I was going through school, where women were allowed equal but separate sports, in high school and in college.
Yeah.
That's already come back to bite because transgenders are
Sure.
running as women in women's sports.
Yeah.
And they are males anyway.
Yeah.
Are competing against women, which is coming back to bite.
Yeah.
And, so that's
Which is destroying the freedom of women.
women, right?
Compete. Okay. So we understand this. So liberty and virtue are absolutely connected. You can't have one without the other. Where a people is degraded and immoral and doesn't understand objective reality and objective truth, that is going to ultimately lead to a loss of actual liberty. And so our highest virtue in our culture is individualism. That we do it. That we I get to decide what is reality for me, and you can't infringe on that. In fact, what you say and how you act and what you own should be subservient to what I want. Where do we see that in the church? Where do we see this kind of radical individualism in the church? Any places you see that kind of thinking invading the church?
Would that be when government mandates to see the sermon before it's preached?
I was thinking more of where are we at fault, not where might that be coerced, but
Music.
Marriage is allowed.
Sure. Okay. We still start to conform our beliefs and our actions to those individualistic whims. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Pharisaical legalism.
Sure. Absolutely.
Jeremy?
Yeah.
Something I was just thinking about is, even if you had a good government that somehow was virtuous, but the people weren't virtuous, the government would still be forced to become tyrannical.
Yeah.
Because in order to control a populace that doesn't want to behave, you'd have to have, a police state.
Yeah.
To regulate everything
Yeah.
and make immoral people behave.
Yeah.
Of course, and unfortunately, it usually ends up both the government and the people are immoral, so it's even worse.
Yeah.
Well, because the people are electing the immoral officials.
Right. They get what
Yeah.
they deserve.
In our kind of government, we get what we deserve. Yeah. Yep. And so you're making my point on 2C there. When you begin to exalt individualism as the highest virtue, there will be a need for a completely bureaucratic regulatory state. He actually said in this that somebody actually worked it out that every citizen is likely committing at least 3 felonies a day because of the numbers of bureaucratic rules and so on that we're just not even aware of. Because when people aren't virtuous and when there's a need to control, which is our government today, it isn't run by elected officials. And this is where, to my understanding, where the real bad things, even though they might be legal bad things, happen in the election. It was states, bureaucrats changing election protocols and stuff just on before the election. And so that's why I think we need to take care to reject all of these insane conspiracy theories, because we have to deal with the bureaucratic changes that came just beforehand, which almost all happened under the watchful, well, we'd hoped to have been watchful GOP state houses like in Wisconsin that didn't do anything to prohibit them.
Going back to what you said last week about the federal government, state government,
Yeah.
and then local government. The federal government is trying to make mandates and laws so that the federal government takes over state government.
Yep.
So that when there's a federal law, that the states have to
Obey it.
comply with that. And there is a voting on Tuesday, so everyone vote on Tuesday for the
State superintendent.
state superintendent.
Yeah, so she was making the point that we're in a republic government where the states' rights, so the 10th Amendment, or is it the 10th Amendment? Yeah. The 10th Amendment guarantees states' rights. That's been dead for a long time. So just let's do some historical thinking. Where is the first place, large example in American history where the federal government overwhelmed states' rights?
Civil War.
Civil War. Absolutely. President Lincoln.
What he did was unconstitutional. I'm really glad he did it, but nevertheless. Couldn't do it by the Constitution.
Unintended consequences, right? Why do we have Roe versus Wade? Does it go back to that? Yeah, should he have? I don't know.
There's also what I remember, I had a history teacher that called the darkest year in American history was 1913. They passed 2 constitutional amendments one that allowed income tax, and the other
Yeah.
changed the appointment of senators from being appointed by the state legislature to being elected by the people.
Hmm.
And that changed, the states lost enormous amounts of power. Because it used to be, if you wanted a good senator, you better pay attention to who you have for a state legislator.
Hmm.
Now we just vote for the senators, and
Yeah.
it's changed the makeup of the way our government functions
Yeah.
drastically.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so where from here? This is where I want to get into a little bit more brass tacks. We did a little bit of this last week, but a bit more. One of the last quotes in this book, it's a long quote. I want to read it, so bear with me on the call to prayer. This is Benjamin Franklin, who again isn't our kind of Christian at all. But he delivered this speech at the Constitutional Convention in order to try to overcome some deadlock. So he starts, Mr. President. This isn't the U.S. President. This is the President of the Constitutional Convention. Mr. President, the small progress we have made after 4 or 5 weeks, close attendance, and continual reasonings with each other, our different sentiment on almost every question, several of the last producing as many no's as ayes, is, methinks, a melancholy proof of the imperfection of the human understanding. So there's a constant debate within the Constitutional Convention that's gotten nowhere. And he chalks it up to our imperfections. We indeed seem to feel our own want of political wisdom, since we have been running about in search of it. We have gone back to ancient history for models of government, examined the different forms of those republics which, having been formed with the seeds of their own dissolution, now no longer exist. So they see in history the ways that they formed government already had the seeds of their destruction within those kind of formations. And so they're struggling with any kind of wisdom. What do we do? It's never worked. How do we make this work? We have viewed modern states all around Europe, but find none of their constitutions suitable to our circumstances. In this situation of this assembly, groping as it were in the dark to find political truth and scarce able to distinguish it when it's presented to us, how has it happened, sir, that we have not hitherto once thought of humbly applying to the Father of lights to illumine our understanding? So we haven't prayed. We're not praying. And this is a man that we wouldn't consider an evangelical Christian. In the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of our danger, we had daily prayer in this room for divine protection. Our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. All of us who were engaged in the struggle must have observed frequent instances of a superintending providence in our favor. To that kind of providence, we owe this happy opportunity of consulting in peace on the means of establishing our future natural felicity. And have we now forgotten that powerful friend? Or do we imagine that we no longer need his assistance? Isn't that funny? Already back then, realizing how proud they've become. And have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, that except the Lord build a house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. We shall be divided by our little partial local interests, our projects will be confounded, and we ourselves shall become a reproach and a byword down to future ages. And, what is worse, mankind may hereafter, from this unfortunate instance, despair of establishing governments by human wisdom and leave it to chance, war, and conquest. I therefore beg leave to move that henceforth prayers, imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings on our deliberations, be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business, and that one or more of the clergy of this city be requested to officiate in that service. Where from here? Prayer.
Did they listen to him?
I don't know. We don't, though, do we? And so, where Benjamin Franklin would urge the Constitutional Convention to begin every day in prayer, what if we began every day imploring God to fix our government, to give us just rulers, to give us as a people virtue, to remove all the sin of our nation, to bring us to repentance. I think this is the big neglect. We, spend our days and hours searching on the internet for the latest, greatest news, and yet we don't spend that kind of time in prayer with fervency, seeking the Lord's assistance to turn us. And so I think there's a great need for us as God's people to go back to worshiping Him together as a church, which I think we do well, but also to prayer. And so what can you do on your own or with your family or with us as a church to call us to gather to pray more frequently? Because I don't think we can demand the kind of freedom that we desire without, using the freedom we have now to call on God in prayer. So that would be first. Second, to go back to what I talked a bit about last week, we need to understand what is going on and learn to fight. What do I mean there? I think we as conservatives have this consistent surprise when the other side fights dirty. And we almost have this expectation that it's always going to be gentlemanly. And I get it. Like I do it too. But why do we expect that? They've proven over and over again to not fight fair. And we shouldn't expect it.
But Jeremy, that doesn't give us license to cheat too.
Well, I'm not saying that.
But we shouldn't follow their example.
I'm not saying that either. No, I agree. We shouldn't follow their example. But going back to the voting, why would we not expect them to to use the coronavirus stuff to change election regulations? Why would that be surprising to us? And why didn't we use every means possible to stop it? I mean, why do we continue to find ourselves, oh, there they did it again?
Because we feel we don't have a voice.
Okay.
We feel like if we say anything, they're gonna not pay any attention.
Yeah, I just think we have to, I understand that. I feel the same way. But the more that we claim to just be victims, what are we going to do? We have to quit finding ourselves in the place of complaining. And what is the action from here on out for us? You are right in a sense that I probably am not going to bring great radical change, but there has to be something. And what are those things?
Sit at the table with your opposition.
Yeah,
Have a
sure.
conversation,
Like,
not go to war.
Yeah.
Not to raise a club in defense of your position. Just
okay.
sit and peacefully talk it out.
Yeah, so get to know your neighbors. Or go to the city council meeting and let your voice be heard. Or invite one of them over for a meal. Or there are things we can be doing in our kind of government here. And it's incredible how much elected officials really want the people's approval and listen to the people that actually talk to them.
They listen, but they still have their own opinion.
Not really. What they really want is to be reelected.
One thing, I work for the town of New Ulm, I go to lots and lots of town board meetings, and usually I'm paid to be there. But I should be there regardless, because there's nobody else there.
Mm-hmm.
And one or two people in the audience can have an enormous effect on the decisions that are made by a board. Because when they're faced with a person that has a request or faced with a person that they have to say no to, they talk about it differently, they react to it differently than if you're not there and they can just do whatever they want. You know, the fact that you're there listening to them make a decision against you will slow organizations down on making those decisions, because they don't want to be confronted with the bad guy. Not that Town New Ulm's any worse than any other place, it's just the way all of them are. And so show up, and if you could be a member of the board, even better. But just being in the audience at any of those things.
You are correct, Mark, because I have been starting to attend Town of New Globe meetings more and more and more regularly now. And it is amazing the difference of attitude.
Yeah.
the town board
They re-
has.
If they realize there's a group of people there with an agenda, they may or may not agree with that agenda, but it either emboldens those that are on your side, or it gets those that are against you to calm down a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, we have annual town meetings, which is not a town board meeting, but it's a meeting of the townspeople. Town government is it's the one place where there is a little bit of direct democracy, where you would actually, the townspeople take a vote. And sometimes it's 4 people or 2 people plus the town board that make those decisions. When it ought to be 300 or 400.
Yeah. So Mark is, for those of you on live stream, we're up to 3 now. We're talking about attending our town, city, county board. And I want to be careful here too. It's not just to complain or tell them what we want. It's also to thank them for their service. It's get them a gift card. Like, let's be decent so that when we do have to disagree, that's not the only time we ever say anything. But I think that's a big deal. And that can also extend to contacting our state representatives, our local state representatives, our federal representatives, and just consistently being that kind of people where they are hearing from believers and realizing that we just haven't given up and that we're still here and that we really do care about the direction of our city, county, state, and nation.
Because there are other people that do show up at those meetings.
Yeah.
With a totally different agenda. than
Oh,
we
yes,
have.
for sure.
Yeah. So along with this, we as Christians who are often rather decent people and really do care about what other people think about us and being liked, we ought to drill it into our heads that to take what we understand as historical, regular Christian positions will get you despised and shamed. And that's going to be in your workplace, especially with H.R. 5, the Equality Act, the so-called Equality Act coming. It's going to get passed one way or another. And the normal things that you and I look at and go, no duh, in our culture are going to cause real, actual suffering and shaming. And we just got to be okay with not being part of the cool kids. It's going to cause a lot of trouble for us. And then what can we do in good conscience that will be effective in this war? And this is where we've been talking. What tools are allowable in our form of government that, we might not always want to use, but aren't illegal and don't go against conscience that we can use? So there are a trilogy of kids' books, like young adult kind that our kids like reading by N.D. Wilson called The Dragon Tooth Chronicles, or Ashtown Burials. Anybody read those? No. So in it, the good guys, Ashtown guys, are fighting the bad guys, and there are ancient weapons. And some of the weapons are evil. And there's a debate going on among the good guys, well, which of these weapons can we use? And some of them have greater issues of conscience with using some of those weapons than others do. And so they all decide, no, we can't use these ones that are evil in and because if we use those, we're just like our enemies. But other ones we can use, and some of them don't want to use them, some of them don't do. And what am I getting at here? We can never lie. Christians can never be a part of lying. We can't obfuscate. We can't say things in such a way to leave our meaning in doubt. We need to be very clear. And I just want to continually implore you, just be really careful in our day of conspiracy theories. Please. It is so easy to be taken in by Facebook posts, news stories that seem to appeal to you, but are not founded in any kind of truth. Just, if somebody says something's going to happen by so-and-so date and it doesn't happen, like, you should not trust them anymore. I don't know. I heard one recently that this past Friday, Trump was supposed to be running the government and he was going to let it all, and that stuff is over and over and over again. I find a lot of Christians being taken in by this stuff. And so we cannot be taken in by this stuff. All right, and the next one is maybe the most important one. The family in combination with the trustworthy church is the main place of this warfare. Christians should get this above all else, but too many times Christians in our day have begun to neglect marriage and neglect having children and raising them in the Lord. And yet, Psalm 127, children are heritage of the Lord from the Lord. And then he goes on to say they're like, arrows in the hands of a warrior. And so I think our greatest cultural impact is going to be continuing to marry and having lots of children and raising them in the Lord. And so seek in reliance on God a Christian spouse and marry and have children and build a home. I think that's the need of the hour. It sounds strange, but in order to have a free society, it depends on the household. That has always been the foundational building block of any nation. And this goes all the way back to Genesis 1 and 2. The first government instituted on the earth is family. It is not good that man be alone. The two shall become one in order to fill the earth and subdue it. And so I think it's the neglect of the family within the church that has really undermined our ability to have freedom. So I think the U.S. birth rate is one of the lowest in the world right now. And even liberals are starting to get this. There was an article in The Atlantic by a guy who's written a book that is urging America to have enough children so that by 20 whatever, we have 1 billion citizens. Because he's realizing the reason that America is being threatened by China and everything is because they are populating us. And so this guy who has no commitment to being Christian, no Christian, but he's realizing, yeah, we need more people. and this, Christians get this. We understand it.
Back in the 60s, university professors were saying 2.1 children.
Yeah.
And that's where my husband was. 2 children.
Yeah, we believed it. You hear it among Christians even that overpopulation is the greatest threat.
Oh yeah, that was big back then.
Yeah. And Christians should, of all people, when you hear something like that, just because we know the Bible well enough, should go,
Doesn't sound right at all.
No, it should never sound right. In fact, if you look at it, I've said this before, but you could take every person on the face of the earth and put them in the state of Texas with a nice house, and they'd have acreage to spare. The whole world could fit in the state of Texas.
Serious.
Seriously. With acreage and a nice house.
I heard Texas was huge.
And the point is, God has created a world that can sustain in incredible amounts of life. I mean, if you've done any kind of flying internationally, and when you fly, at night, you fly over areas of the world that are completely dark. There's no humans there anywhere. Anyways, we need children. And then, D, the need for virtue. And this is where we as Christians on the issue of family and virtue really do need to continue. Now, I want to be careful. I think Christians are the most virtuous people often on the planet. And yet we individually need to continue to repent of our sins, especially in the area of sexual immorality. And why do I bring up sexual immorality? Because I think when you're involved in sexual sin, you are more liable to be steered than at any other time in your life because you're ashamed. And when you have that kind of shame in your life of sexual morality, they can get your hooks in you and you will not be courageous. So the righteous are as bold as a lion, but people who are involved in sin are often given to fear immediately and will not take a stand anymore because they don't want to be outed. They don't want the shame to be made public. I think we see this in government all the time. The rampant sexual morality. And why did that guy suddenly vote that way? Well, somebody's got dirt on him. That's why.
Isn't
And,
that a conspiracy theory though?
well, I think that's just been proven over and over again.
But you gotta have the blue dress to prove it.
Sure. Yeah, but if you've had your eyes open at all, you see it. The sexual immorality is
That leads to conspiracy theory.
it is mega. I mean, look at our presidents. It's sick. It really is sick. And so, but leave that aside then. We can't be like that. We can't be like that. And so, what is the God-given solution to sexual desire? Which is good, right? We don't think sexual desire is evil in of itself. It's a good gift of God. What is the God-given solution to sexual desire? Marriage and have sex. That's it. I'm hardly blushing this time when I said that. And you guys could add other things. I sat there just thinking, okay, where from here? And the next one is just read. We have to be informed. So read good books, right? So think about reading like eating. We all need to eat, but what you eat is as important as that you eat. And so you need a good diet, and books are food for the soul. And so you got to eat good food. You got to read good books. If you lived on Cheez-Its, you're not going to be real healthy. And your souls too can be lazy, and you want to read books that are easy, but take care. What? Comic, yeah, I don't know what kind. Well,
Can't really learn much from them.
yeah. So, what do I mean by good books? Books that'll challenge you. Books that do speak the truth about history. I encourage you to read widely. Don't take care, like in your diet, if you just eat one kind of food without a variety, that's not healthy. And so take care, just not read one kind of book. Typically you'll have one kind of food that you really enjoy. And so there'll be one kind of book that you really enjoy, and just take care to get outside of that. I know for whatever reasons, especially for guys, I don't know why it wasn't always this way. But it's just not a guy thing to read sometimes. I just want to encourage you to get out of that if you can. If you want a list of books to start with, please ask me. I could recommend them. I recommend them all the time. But read. And then learn to be skeptical in your reading. What do I mean there? I mean, just don't take what the author is saying as true. Ask questions. And the main reason to do that is, well, you want to arrive at truth, but if you are a kind of a skeptical reader, you'll learn more, because you're just always questioning it. You're always wanting to dig a little further and think about it. And so just take care there to be skeptical, especially in our day. And one of the things is, I think as we go into the kind of world we're going in, local is going to be much more important. Like this kind of church with these kind of believers and elders and pastors, like listening to your local leaders is going to be increasingly important, because it's going to be really hard to know who to trust out there, because we don't know them. And that even goes in the church. How many large, important Christian leaders have fallen in or been shown to be in great immorality? And so it's going to be, all right, prepare for the worst. Isn't that weird that we have to say things like that now? But it really isn't that weird in American history, is it? It was just a few generations ago that we thought, the Russians were going to be dropping bombs on us, and people were building nuclear shelters in their backyards and having, bomb drills at school. And so this is just society. And I think one of the ways to prepare is we're going to need friends. You're going to need relationships here. And so cultivate relationships among your believing friends here. Practice hospitality. Care for each other. It's going to be really important. And then, you already said it, guns, training, etc. do a little bit of research on the internet. What does it look like to be prepared? Have guns, actually get training in how to use them, not just firing at a immovable target, but actual training. If you can find some ammunition, stock up, food, water.
Well, the important thing about the guns is learn when not to use.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Communication, first aid kits. It seems strange, but I think we need to be thinking about those things right now, especially with HR 5 coming down the pipeline. The Equality Act, I don't have time, we're out of time. Look it up. It's basically taking the civil rights legislation that prohibited discriminating somebody based on their race, and now it's applying that to transgenderism, gay, wokeness, and so they could coerce your speech, your business, our church. We have an open pastor position, and if a transgender man deciding to be a woman applied for it and we said no based on that, we would be violating his civil rights and be open to real trouble. All right, that's it. Thanks, guys, for attending this class. So next week we'll start a topic on what is assurance of salvation, and we'll spend a few weeks on it. And hope you join me. But if not, feel free to check out the other classes. Thanks, guys, for all of your attention here.